Hello and welcome back to LTC Heroes Live. My name is Peter Murphy Lewis. I'm your host. Today I'm joined with Karen Knavel. She's the CEO at New Avenues to Independence. Karen, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having us, Peter. We're thrilled to be here.
I'm excited to hear your story because I know that it's different than the majority of people that I interview. I do a lot of frontline caregivers and then I do a lot of facilities, but I understand that New Avenues is different. Can you tell me a little bit about your initiation story and how you got into long-term care, and then work our way? We'll go into what is New Avenue.
Okay, so New Avenues to Independence is a provider of services to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Northeast Ohio. So we provide services in 3 counties, and we serve about 200 adults and children every year. Mostly, a lot of our work is providing people with support during their day, round the clock, care in their home, activities of daily living, that type of thing. But we also assist people with getting out in the community and, really being good neighbors and, work. They might be interested in work or volunteering, those types of things.
How did you get into long-term care? Did you start in long-term care in high school? Did you get into long-term care 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think from the day I was born, Peter. My mother is one of 7 children, and one of her sisters has an intellectual and developmental disability. So back in the day when I was much younger, there really wasn't any alternatives other than institutions for people like my aunt. And so my grandmother was committed to keeping her home, and the other siblings had a lot of responsibilities to help in her care. And, so from a very young age, I watched my grandmother be so committed to ensuring that her daughter was not institutionalized. And so when we would visit grandma, Mary Ellen was my aunt's name. Is my aunt's name. And she had her routines. It was just important that she had her routines. Sweeping out the garage was one of her jobs. And just to give you a sense of her age, my grandmother had a Pinto, right? Brown Pinto, never forget it. And when Mary Ellen accomplished that, she got McDonald's, and it was a big deal. So from there, my uncle ended up having a son, my cousin, with severe disabilities. And that was a lot different from Mary Ellen, who's very high functioning, who could live at home, needed prompts and some supports. But my cousin was total care. He has never walked. He has never talked. He doesn't feed himself. And he was born in the 70s. And so his options were a lot different from my aunt's. So in the 70s is when the education came out. There was some legislation around people with disabilities and giving them more opportunities. And so when he turned 21, moved into a group home. And so I like to think my story starts at birth. And so, fast forward, and when I was in college, I worked as a direct support professional, putting myself, paying some of my tuition and probably some beer money, or whatever, weekend fun money, working as a direct support professional. After that, I always thought that I would be an advocate for people with disabilities. So after I was done with my undergraduate work, I went to law school. And I had some wonderful opportunities in law school to work with practitioners who specialize in disability law and disability rights. Found out my heart wasn't there because it wasn't, quite frankly, close enough to the people. Like I was usually stuck in a library doing research. And not that I didn't like that part. I do enjoy research, but I couldn't imagine a lifetime of not serving and being closer to the people I was so passionate about.
I want to pause and talk about, when did you start to realize the way that your family was approaching long-term care and taking care of your own was unique? A lot of times we take things for granted. Like I took for granted how amazing my father was to his parents until I had a son. And I'm like, wow, why did I wait till I was 36 to appreciate him as much? When did you start to realize, wow, there's something different in our family's DNA and I need to continue on this heritage?
Right. So it really happened in my first experience as a direct support professional. So I worked in a group home with 6 women. 5 of the 6 women came out of institutions, and I was young. I mean, I was in college, but I didn't realize how young or sheltered, so to speak, I had been. And so the 5 women who had come out of an institution, none of them had their front teeth
Mm.
because people who worked in the institutions thought they needed to be force fed.
Mm.
All 5 of the women had hysterectomies. Again, the only option was institutions, and they didn't think they could feed themselves. They could not have babies. And that was so radically different from my experience in my family. And that's kind of just what further propelled me that, there's so much more work to be done.
I want to get into a specific story or mentor or resident when you were starting to come to of age and knowing that you wanted to follow your family. It feels like your family's destiny, their legacy. There has to be a specific interaction with either a mentor who taught you how to see the world the way that you do today, or some resident. Is there something that comes to mind when I'm talking about this? You're like, I want to take this, still makes me smile today.
I always go back to my grandmother, really, and her example of just believing that as a family, we were going to take care of Mary Ellen, be a part of this, and I come from a large family, so this community that supports people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I always kind of just talk about being very young and watching her and admiring her commitment, because it could have been so easy to put Mary Ellen in an institution, right?
Do you remember any words from your grandmother, either something that she said over and over, or a specific way that a tone, the way that she talked to your grandmother talked to her daughter? Or is there anything that's like, oh, that gives me goosebumps? I can remember this.
It was more of just the expectations that my grandmother set for the family, and still to this day, my grandmother has passed away. But my uncle has stepped up and is now, the guardian, and has been the guardian. And the rest of the siblings, Mary Ellen still comes home on the weekends. She's got a garage that she can sweep out, and she gets McDonald's, right? The routine continues because my grandmother really set those expectations.
Tell me about New Avenues to Independence. How big is it? How many homes do you go to? How many frontline caregivers do you have on your team?
Sure. So, like I mentioned earlier, we serve over 200 adults and children each year. It's primarily adults. So the children that we serve are in summer camp. So it's 5 to 7 weeks each summer. So I'll focus a little bit more on the adults that we serve. That is 24/7, 365. So we have what are called intermediate care facilities, and New Avenues owns and operates 9 of those in Northeast Ohio. And so those are folks that are have increased need for supports. So we have nursing, and I think that would be the primary example. So it's a step down from nursing home level of care, but they still need a higher level of care. And then we have our community-based program. And in those community-based programs, we have over 20 sites, and those are typically smaller settings. And again, we go in and we don't own those homes, but we go in and provide the supports that the individual needs or has requested. And to do that, to accomplish all that mission work, we employ over 250 direct support professionals every year. They're really critical to our work.
With those direct support care members, when you're hiring or when you're looking for an amazing person to add to your team that has the same passion, that your grandmother has given to you, what does that person look like? I'm sure there's a way that you can express it. You might not put on the job description, but when you're interviewing that person, you look for a certain type of person. Who is that? What does it look like?
So it comes down to what do you value, and then matching the person to the particular location. So, everyone is really unique in what they need or what they're interested in regard to their services. So some staff, when you're talking to them, if they really have a caretaking value system, where they understand the importance of privacy and intimacy and in bathing, for example. That's a good match, for a home where individuals need that kind of assistance. Some people are fun loving, they like, staff, if they talk about what do they do in their free time. Oh, they like to go to the park or concerts or sporting events. Well, we serve people who have similar interests. So it's getting to know the direct support professional and what's important to them and their value system, and then doing a good match with the person they'll be working with and supporting.
One of the things that I try to do to make sure that we improve the staffing crisis is celebrate our wins. And one of the things that I want to do to celebrate those wins is talk about who those individuals are. You just talked about a certain type of caregiver, and that person has a name. Can you think of one or two people inside of your organization that are already aligned with the values that you've been talking about? And let's give them a shout out.
Sure. So I would think one example for me, and I'm trying.
And don't worry, we don't have to name all of them.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Just name one name, and you're like, this person is,
right.
Like when I go out and hire, I kind of look for this type of person.
Right. And so there is a woman at one of that works at a site with 3 gentlemen in our community-based services program. And, she really values making sure that the individuals that reside in the home are fully integrated into the community. And she's very deliberate about that process. During the pandemic, and we're frontline workers during the worst of it, our individuals, much like us, still really need contact, right? I mean, just because somebody has a disability or might be a little bit more mentally compromised doesn't mean that they don't need those connections. And she was incredibly creative in how she connected people, virtually, for those who, really were more comfortable staying home, but also, helping one of the gentlemen maintain his competitive employment, because that was what was important to him. So it's direct support professionals, direct care workers who understand that everyone has those unique needs, and meeting them and supporting them where they're at.
I want to ask you, what did you learn about yourself during COVID or from COVID? About your communication style, or the way you handle stress, or the way that the things you don't need in life, or the things you do need in life. What did you learn about yourself?
Oh, wow. I'm a survivor. You know what I mean? Like, just
You're welcome on this program, as you've seen me cry before.
Right. Because it was scary. I'm sure, so many people were scared, and not having a whole lot of time to be scared. I spent a lot of time outside people's windows, just making sure, because again, I value that connection. I'm a hugger. You know what I mean? Not being able to hug was so hard, or not being able to see people, so we had this thing where, I became the Easter bunny and just delivered Easter baskets outside people's doors, so that I could literally be a peeping Tom and just look in and say hello and get the waves and the virtual hugs. And so
have you read the book 5 Languages of Love?
We've had a little fodder about that, and now apparently they have the 5 languages of work or something as well.
Yeah. One of my love languages is touch. And so when COVID took that away, it feels like it's taken away 50% of the way that you express yourself. So when you say, you weren't able to hug for 2 years, that's hard.
Right.
Because that's how we fill ourselves full of energy and how we give back energy. And you take that away from us, it's like taking away nutrition from us for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I am glad that some, we're settling into COVID, learning how to live with COVID. Because I've been able now to go inside the homes and really see people again.
Karen, before we move on to rapid fire questions, I want to take just a brief pause and thank our sponsors and invite some of our listeners over to LTC Heroes. Want to connect with leaders in long-term care? Go to www.ltcheroes.com to join our community on Facebook and LinkedIn. Get exclusive access to marketing tips, SOPs, and insights from prominent voices in the industry. Only at ltcheroes.com. And we're back for just a couple rapid fire questions. And as I mentioned, feel free to say pass if it puts you on the spot. This is one of my favorite ones, and feel free to take 20 seconds to think of it. If you could have one gigantic billboard on the outside of a big city that would say whatever you wanted to millions of people drive by it, what would you put on that billboard and why?
I would say you matter.
Ooh, that one's a good one. That's the first time I've heard that. Why?
I think if we learned anything from COVID, is that we now have a real opportunity to reimagine our society in a new way that includes everyone, right? And so a lot of times people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, just a little bit from my story, have not been included. The language is there, but the action is not there. And to let folks know that they matter, and hopefully, the world will be a different place for them coming out of COVID.
Oh, powerful. Next question I want to ask you, Karen, is do you have a favorite failure? Do you have something that you got punched in the gut and you didn't know if you're going to get back up again, but you did, and you're a stronger woman today because of it?
Sure. Right. I think so often, I think about that so often. So I have this philosophy, at our agency, that we're going to try, and if we fail, as long as we learn along the way, that's okay. We have to think differently, especially with this pandemic. And so I think that really, comes from my personal failures or my personal view on the challenges that I faced. And, like I mentioned earlier, I think one of the most telling moments for me in my life is I spent 3 years and a whole bunch of money on law school, and I've never practiced law. I have a license and I never practiced law. And I think there are some folks that would say, well, that's a failure, right? And it's just my path was different. And again, I at that time in my life when I didn't feel pulled towards practicing law, my mother, I think who knew me so well, said it was okay and gave me permission to follow my heart. And so I think that was really a really strong experience for me.
Thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable. I can identify I wanted to be successful in academia. My parents didn't finish college, and so I went to study my master's and then my PhD and got extremely sick. And when I quit my PhD, it was because my mom told me I could do it, and I felt like such a failure. And looking back on it, she made me successful because now I'm happy. So Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Karen, it's great to meet you here. I want to thank the Ohio Healthcare Association for inviting LTC Heroes to come here and meet amazing leaders like yourself and see what you all are doing in Ohio. Thank you so much, and I look forward to connecting you in the future and hopefully see you next year.
All right. Thank you, Peter.
Talk to you soon. This episode of LTC Heroes is brought to you by Experience Care, the only long-term care software developed by EHR users and clinicians every step of the way. Visit experience.care/guarantee to get your free profitability consultation today.